8 o'clock live on TV and it starts. Well, how does it sync? They put advertisement going on now.
Good evening and welcome to Plain Talk. My name is Mr. Fram. Thank you for joining me for the next hour as we discuss a topic of common interest, popular interest. And tonight I'm going to discuss with my guests a question of mining and its role in Guyana's development. For those of us who were around the commencement of the Economic Recovery Program, remember all too well the very significant role played by Omai Gold Mines Limited in our economy. Then not too long ago, Guyana Goldfields, Troy Resources, and it was all for some time about gold mining. Then came the announcement in June 2015 by ExxonMobil that their Guyana branch had discovered a major oil resources offshore Guyana, and the conversation is now all about oil. My guest tonight is Dr. Andrew Ramcharan. He's a mining engineer, also engaged in financing on mining activities. And the first question I'm going to ask him is not about mining, but about the perception of Guyana in the diaspora following the announcement of the oil discovery. And let me, as you answer the question, let me take the opportunity to welcome you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thanks for having me here.
The perception of Guyana.
So what I'll try to outline is the global perception of how things are being seen in Guyana. So as you know, there's the massive greenstone belt that comes from Africa and comes across into South America. And it's well known around the world by mining technical experts that this is one of the most lucrative area where you should be doing exploration work to be finding gold and do exploitations. So for example, in Ghana, Mali, Senegal, Burkina Faso, there's a lot of gold. Over 150 million ounces of gold was extracted from these regions. And when the continents were together, what happened is that this belt overlaid into Suriname, Brazil, Guyana, and Venezuela.
Let me interrupt. Isn't it, are there similarities with petroleum, when the two continents were together?
There potentially might be some of those similarities, but in terms of the mining side, the geology of the deposits is very evident that it's very similar. So for example, if you go to Ghana and you take a sample of soil and you come to Guyana or Suriname or Brazil or Venezuela, it's going to be pretty much on the greenstone belt.
Well, my question to you was the perception of Guyana.
Right, I'm getting there.
In relation to following the discovery of oil.
Okay, so what happened in the perception of discovery, it is well known around the world that Guyana, a small country in South America, had this major find in oil. The infrastructure might be a bit challenging, but as things advance...
You mean infrastructure for Guyana?
Yeah.
And when you say infrastructure, Dr. Ramcharan, are you referring to physical infrastructure or social infrastructure, education, health, social services, etc.?
So that's a great question, Chris. So it's a combination of all of these. So what you find is that, you know, like Guyana being a developing country, it is not, you know, was expecting this major find. And now to advance from this stage to go into production, there are stepping stones that you have to follow. And, you know, there's consequences by not following this. So it's a combination of all of what you just mentioned.
You talk about stepping stone and consequences, but you recall an article in the New York Times, not the Krauss article, but the one that says what Guyana is now going to be doing is moving from 0 to 60
Exactly.
in
Couple
next to no time.
seconds, yes.
How does given your own experiences internationally, how does a country make that kind of adjustment without undue and calamitous consequences?
So it's going to be some challenges, of course, because we're taking a nation into a new, area where, potentially there might not have been expertise here and the capital here. And then you have to consider things like on the geopolitical front with the, the arrangements with the Venezuelan government. So it's going to be some challenges, obviously, but on the flip side, we have to look on the positive side. Some countries have done this, and while it's not the same time frame, it took maybe a bit longer. But what we have to step back.
Which kind of countries? You said some countries. Give us a couple examples.
So, like in some of the oil-rich countries in the Middle East, initially, if we go back into the history of like countries like Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and some of the countries in North America. But this is going back very long periods ago.
Decades.
Yeah, exactly, or centuries ago. And even in some countries, so what they have done is, they have moved from where we're moving from a country does not know this industry to someone like you're saying, in a couple seconds, we're going to have to be into oil production. So there will be a lot of, stepping stones to get there.
Where you mentioned the word expertise, where do people like you come into this? Guyanese, non-resident, with considerable expertise and experience, and no doubt other resources.
Yeah, there are a lot of, expertise out there. Guyanese are one, and there's other expertise there. But what I find is that the Guyanese expertise overseas, if they're deep into these industry, they generally not tend to, follow what goes on here. But to tap on these resources could be very interesting, because the point is, like, if you're based out of Guyana and you're in a developed country and you're in this industry, and as you might recognize, it's a very lucrative industry for young professionals and professionals to be stepping here and assisting. While it's a great thing to give back and to be helping, it's going to be a change or a slight difference how things, what you're accustomed to be stepping back here. But what I think the key focus is, it should be on training and maybe coming back and helping out with shorter period or shorter stints initially, and just to get, groove back into the culture and regroove, and then, as things progress, you can, see how much more time you can be here and helping out.
But, and I don't want to exclude mining from the discussion in terms of development of those sectors and those industries, but they're essentially capital intensive. They're not great creators of employment directly, so that you have an oil rig. It's a lot of computers, and it's probably part of it is fed through Houston, Texas.
Sure.
And so the other point about it is it's private sector. So how does a government, and again I'm asking you to draw on your own experiences, how does the government of Guyana, build the necessary enabling environment, to use that overused term, to attract people? And why are they going to attract them anyway? Because to the private sector, who do they serve? We saw the Minister of Finance said we don't have auditors to audit $460,000 Well, I think that's an insult to the auditing profession. We'll soon have to audit 460 million and 4.6 billion, so I'm not sure. Where does the skill come in for the country as opposed to businesses?
Sure. So do you want me to touch on the mining side or both
Either
mining
side.
and oil?
It's a general
Okay.
question.
So this is one of very interesting questions. As you know, I've invested through my companies on huge investments around the world, from like West Africa, Africa, South America, and stuff. And indeed, it is very capital intensive. So for example, I'll give you an example. I've worked on the Pascalama project that Barrick owns on Argentina and Chile. The initial estimate was approximately $4 billion to start the mine. I've worked on this 2 years ago. They've spent about $6 billion to date, and they haven't produced an ounce of gold.
But why is that bad planning?
There was the gold project. It was on the border of Argentina and Chile. So then there were some issues with the Chilean government. So then the glaciers weren't too far, so some environmental concerns. And I know you smile because this is going to lead to a lot of questions. But the bottom line is that these things are capital intensive, for sure. Oil is, for a regular oil thing, it's going to run you $5, $6, $8 billion. But in the mining sector too, it's like to go, I think the Guyana gold fields, they're going to go underground mining. Mm-hmm. And the capital, I think they're estimating it's over $100 million. So now to get the expertise, in my view, the best thing would be to do is to bring the guys who knows these fields, and keep them here for a while, and then transition and train the locals. But if they come in and out, we'll be in the same position. So while there are great people here that has the ability and the potential to do these things, it's just that exposure and experience. So if we bring people in a longer period of time, it's going to cost us a lot of money initially, relatively speaking, and then do a transition like a 2-4 years. But definitely I agree, we need a lot of significant training to the skill set of mining and petroleum here if we want to take this nation and the people of this country forward.
Look, we've got some experiences in gold, in particular. In oil and gas, we've got none. At least not homegrown experience. An ExxonMobil, Guyana Goldfields, a Tullow, Repsol, coming in, they're going to be bringing their own people. They're putting $4, $6, $8 billion, and we're talking United States dollars. They're not coming here for an experiment. They're coming here to make money. They're coming here to try to ensure that their shareholders in some other jurisdiction are kept happy. They're playing with volatility in prices, gold, petroleum. So, and what you do find in such a situation is that you have 5 or 6 expatriates earning as much as 100 locals, even the trained local ones, because of all kinds of barriers and human resource considerations and arrangements to induce people to come to this third world country. How can you overcome something like that?
Yeah, so we've done this too, because I'm on the other side of the fence too, as you can imagine. So I think in 2009, we had a major investment in Burkina Faso. We bought a gold project and we put it into production in 18 months and start. And then we had a few of us in the country, and all others were locals. But it leads back to the point that I was getting at initially, that the training, and more importantly, that it's embedded in the local expertise skill set. That it's not like you come in, you train for 2 months, and then you leave. But it's a transition period, an exposure period. Mining and oil is a very different industry. It's not industry where you tend to learn within 1 or 2 or 5 years. So for example, when I started mining and I started working in Canada, I worked in a mine, and there's highly computerized softwares and stuff like that that I know that's not fully available here. So it took me at least 4 or 5 years, and I lectured these at the University of Toronto in mining engineering, resource and reserve estimation. And these students take at least 5 years to learn these software that aids them, and it's very crucial in the day-to-day work. Because as you can imagine, everything is fully computerized, everything is done on the highest level of technology. So the bottom line is that we need to get people in, not for a 1-year period, not for a 2-year, or like a 5 or 10-year period. And it has to be a long-term strategy and planning. And I think, the potential and the brain set is here. There's no doubt. It's just leading back to that exposure and experience. And what the great thing is that a lot of mines would actually, if you call them up and say, we have a few engineers and geologists that want to visit and see how things are done, and maybe have a rotation stint, 6 months here, 6 months there, and there's big mines right in Roosevelt.
But would employers want to do that? Would employers want to?
Companies are very open, and especially if you do go back to the university and have like a relationship with other university, the company to company, university to university, and you work through these channels, they are very willing to happy to do these things, exchange programs and stuff like that.
When we talked about the professional diaspora or the diasporic professionals, you suggested the cost to attract them would be prohibitive.
It's, as you can imagine, it's a slight difference between hiring an engineer in North America in petroleum versus in Guyana, or a trained person.
So how do you overcome that?
So you have to pay them more. That's one way. And if you can attract, the foreign guys, and he comes here, you have to have incentives, to make him to want to come here. And one way is paying more. 2, it's, you encourage them and, just explain the patriotic side. It's the bottom line is the economics.
Patriotic, has nothing to do with money. But as you said, you operate from the other side of the fence. Persons are there really to make money. You go for local labor when you think it's cheaper, almost invariably.
Of course, all businesses generally tend to want to, the higher the profit margin, the better.
So forget all social considerations. Corporate social responsibility is nice cliche.
No, they do consider it too, but business is a business.
And how it impacts the bottom line. That if you've got a good social image and so on, it's good. No, ExxonMobil is sponsoring cricket. You don't know a thing about cricket.
But the key thing, Chris,
but they're buying goodwill.
Yeah, it's important to support the local industries. But, there definitely some companies do look at these sides. Some may not as much, but bottom line, I think they're very supportive of, the local, whatever cultural stuff that it involves.
Let me ask you this. Most of these companies, or all these companies, whether you were talking OMI, Golden Star, Cambi, or Hess, Sinop, Nexen, Esso, not a single one of them has opened their shareholding to Guyana. Is that good corporate social responsibility?
No, if that's the case, it's, we have to understand.
That is the case. That is the case.
We have to understand the reason why they're not doing these things. And, I agree, it's, we have to give back more to the communities, to the local people, and ensure things are done on the social corporate side, and ensure that, the people get what they deserve.
Should companies be made compelled to give open part of their shareholding to the local investment community?
So generally, the norm is that the bigger companies tend to give to the government, and it's a government duty to distribute to the community where potentially the work is being done.
I'm going a more direct way, to open it locally.
So then that can be an agreement. In the agreement, you discuss that in agreement that, okay, you don't want the company to do the corporate tax or the royalties to the central government. Instead, you want it to go to the community.
No. They must pay taxes and royalties like
Oh,
every
it's an
other.
additional.
It's a question, you know.
So there's some companies actually now, some countries. I remember in just I came back from Africa that are actually coming up with a system that wherever, like I just came back from the Congo. So wherever the money is coming from. So for example, we're mining tin or copper or cobalt, and when we get our revenue, it actually goes directly a portion to where it's being extracted. So I think they're leaning towards that, because a lot of times what happened, it goes to the central government and the distribution actually never gets back to the community where the mineral is being extracted from.
We talked about the volatility of prices. How do international companies, whether it's in the mining or other extractive sectors like petroleum, how do they protect themselves against the extreme swings in prices?
So there's different mechanism in place, and generally it's hard to predict the prices, exactly what it's going to do. But when you do an investment, which we do a lot of sensitivity analysis on the price of the commodity, if it's oil, it's gold, it's copper, it's cobalt, tin, whatever. So we say, for example, we're doing a gold investment. Gold price today, it's 11.75. We look at gold price today, we look at trends, we look at other, geopolitical parameters. Now we're going to say, okay, based on this, today's spot price, it's 11.75. Let's run our cash flow model at 11.75 with some projection and see how things are done. And then look at our valuation. And if the valuation comes back and said, it's reasonable, we'll invest. But we run sensitivity now on a lower case. Like we're going to say, okay, what if we missed everything and gold price drops? How does it affect it? Then there's what is another route that we normally would do, is that all the bankers, the big banks, like have a consensus like the analysts, and the analysts now have a gold price projection or a copper or an oil projection. And we say, okay, in this year or this period, this is the price. And we use these price here and do the projections and come up with a valuation. When you don't do your MPV and it makes sense for the repayment, they can repay, and it works, then you invest. Or, so that's another thing, there's hedging. So hedging, you can sell forward certain
Hedging
things.
is a form of gambling, of course.
It's
Because you're taking a bet on something that some kind of situation
But
that
there's-
today's situation will prevail into the future, or vice
Oh.
versa.
Yeah, for sure. But it's what's important is that on a hedging side, there's a roof and a floor when you go into this here. On a downside, it protects you. So for example, what's happening on the last couple of days in the international market, or gold price is tanking. If you had hedged, and when gold is at 14, and you put the floor at 1200, you would have been getting 1200
Yes.
today, even though it's there. So those are different mechanisms and schemes to do these evaluations.
Another common characteristic mining and petroleum exploration and production is the question of the effect on the environment. We all know that the world will die unless we can bring the greenhouse gas emission down. Nobody wants to get in it. Paris made some important steps. The US pulled out, Trump pulls out of everything. How do you see, from the literature, even if and your own practical experience, how do you see environmental issues affecting both mining and petroleum?
No, that's a very good one, Chris. I've worked on over 100 countries on all the planet here, and on all the continents, sorry. And one thing I note, it's environmental standards varies from place to place, and more, importantly, from countries to country, depending on the level of development.
But the world is moving to some common standards because the environment doesn't stop at the border. It doesn't know about these artificial borders.
So what I'm getting to, it's more like the environmental standard in, for example, Canada, even though they have international standards, it's going to be different from countries like, for example, let's say we're doing something in Ghana.
Mm-hmm.
So even though, the international framework is set there, when you go to the mines or to the oil rigs or the oil fields and stuff, you would actually physically see it there. So it's similar, just like in any other industry,
But don't you see, as the threat becomes more imminent, because it's already real, but it comes closer, that all countries and their standards will have to converge, and particularly since the operators are international operators.
Yeah.
So whether it's a Canadian or an American or French, Spanish, their government would expect that whether they're operating in the Congo, Burkina Faso, Guyana, that they will observe and apply their home country standards.
Yes. So, as you know, like on the Equators Principle, on what the World Bank has, on the environmental side, it's an international set of guidelines on the environmental. But the thing is, again, it goes back to the point. Even though it's established and it's there, it's just like an auditing and accounting. You have the IFRS standards and all of these standards. But I know that's your field. It's how it's done in some countries, even though it's established guidelines and it's all written. How it's done in certain countries and how it's done in other countries, it's slightly different.
Except with accounting, it's more principle based on, like maybe the US is more prescriptive. And auditors, for example, they express opinions rather than facts. In the case of environment, it's more precise measures.
Yeah,
it's absolute.
For sure. So I think countries, like for example, like the developed countries, are pushing harder to ensure that when foreign companies operate in our jurisdiction, they abide by the standards that they come from and could be held liable. So for example, if you're Canadian and you go and operate in Mali, it's expected that what you do environmentally in Canada, you do the same in there, and you can be held liable back into Canada if you do something wrong. And if there's a spillage, for example, and damages the environment and throws effluent down the tailings down the rivers and the pond, the persons or the professional engineers or whoever design it could be held liable in the country plus back into Canada.
Well, that's an interesting point you raise, because when we had the spill,
Oh my spill,
the Canadian courts said, go back to your little country in South America and bring your action there. Don't come here.
So now that's what things has changed.
Has that changed?
Things are changing for sure. And now, there's slight difference how things are going to be done. Because what happened between that period of time, there's a few other spillages. And there's the one in Brazil not too long ago too. So the world now is seeing what's going on. The environmentalists are going more proactive. So overall, I think things are progressing. Things are moving forward in a positive direction. Whether it's there that we're expecting it should be, maybe not. But from 20 years ago, things have been progressing. But you're right, in the scheme of things on the global level, these are serious concerns because the population of the world is growing. The people needs more car, they more cell phone, which means they need more cobalt, they need more copper, things to build. And with the global market, things are changing drastically.
But even though there are more people and they need more cars, household electricity, the renewable energy is still small, but the potential for renewable energy is almost inexhaustible. And the sun in one day could produce all the energy you need for you decide not. So has Guyana discovered oil too late?
I don't think so. When we step back and step at the international level, the world is in turmoil. If we follow the news, what's going on with the agreements and world trades and the Saudis and the Turks and the Canadian and Americans and Australians and North Koreans and stuff like that. What's going on in the Middle East? It's things can change rapidly if there's some big instance of one country going against other and pulling other countries in. It would shoot oil price up. It's like if the bloc in the Middle East, like what's going on now in Iran and the U.S. and there's so much geopolitical instances happening.
We're gonna get to politics because I got to talk to you about politics in Guyana.
Yeah, as you know, I worked into Canadian politics with the Liberals.
But the point is this: as renewable energy, solar, wind, water, as those sources and the technology to exploit those sources improves, particularly China, maybe to a lesser extent India, I don't know. Is that likely to have a dampening effect on fossil fuel?
No, I think a combination of fossil fuel and solar energy and hydro, the more energy independent you are, the better for your economy and the people and your industry. So like if you start producing energy, some of the key costs in, for example, oil or mining is power costs and labor costs. So if we can get power costs lowered, it definitely helps. Whether we use solar, we go with hydro down.
Who does it help? It helps mainly the investor. The
No, not necessarily. So it helps the investors for sure, because they're going to have to bring stable and reliable power to make sure these things run. They will repay these loans with a capital intensity, as you know what it is. But what it does, it trickles into the communities and stuff, that the power source is there, and it gets into the community level and the people. Because bottom line, these are crucial. And I think, with so much land space here and stuff, solar panel is amazing, and the hydro dam plants are great too. And these things should be definitely considered and, relook at.
You're essentially in mining, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, there's been a lot of talk, not only in Ghana, particularly since the 70s. Yes, Kuwait, I think in the 60s, started Sovereign Wealth Fund. Norway, not until the 70s, I believe, when they discovered. Sovereign Wealth Fund has largely been associated with petroleum. But why, or can I put the question this way? Are you aware of any country in which sovereign wealth fund, stabilization fund, heritage fund, call it what you will, is associated with the mining sector?
If I recall, I think the Saudi had a small fund there, and some Middle Eastern country, because I think at one time, if I recall.
No, I'm talking other than oil.
No, I know. Yeah, it was gold.
Okay,
I think
yes.
there were some, because I think we tried to tap into those funds at one time to create an investment fund. But I do think so. I cannot tell you clearly off.
Of course, Chile is their SRF is essentially from. But I'm thinking particularly in gold. I don't know of any.
I remember we tried about 5 years ago to tap into some of these sovereign funds to build our own funds, and some actually were into gold funds. Yeah, but generally a lot of our oil funds. But I can't remember exactly. I think it was Saudi Arabia and somewhere in the Middle East.
Now, we talk about 0 to 60, and we come back. We go on this economic discussion. A country has absorptive capacity, and you know, in whatever field, if all you guys were to come up here with all your PhDs, etc., the country just could not absorb you. If we have no depletion policy, in other words, we don't say, and we can't say because the ExxonMobil now determines how much and how fast they're going to be exploiting our resources. That can have serious consequences. The Dutch disease, with your exchange rate, and it could even create its sister problem, the resource curse. Countries that you are familiar with, how did they prevent that type of situation?
So that's the main thing here tonight, I think, you know. It's...
You should be a politician, honestly.
So I think it goes back to the basis of the founding of these countries. So if you step back and you look on a global scale, the countries with natural resources and petroleum that does well are mainly countries like Canada, Chile, Australia, South Africa, and stuff at certain times. And if you go back, it's in the DNA that these countries operate a little bit better, relatively speaking, to what certain other countries...
You sure that's not a racist statement?
No, no.
You said DNA.
And no, I mean in the foundation and the basis of the economy.
Andrew, I mean, we tend to... You mentioned Chile. Chile is not one. Chile is part of us. Chile
Exactly.
is one. But a great example is Botswana.
Yeah.
And I haven't heard anybody talking about Botswana as a country that decided in diamond with De Beers what its depletion policy would be and how it would manage the exchange rate. You know in Zambia, I think Zambia, yes, the copper mines in Zambia.
Yes, the big copper one, there's big ones in
but what it did, what the Dutch disease did to that country.
Right, but then that's what going back to, if you look at Chile, the largest copper producer with a very strong economy, it's because when these countries come, the bigger company comes in. So for example, I'm giving you a typical example. Chile stand to Barrick on the Pascalama project I told you about, where they put $6 billion to date, and haven't produced an ounce of gold yet. In their system, it's more regulated and stuff like that, and they could come to the biggest gold mining company like Barrick and say, okay, mister, I don't think you should be doing this. It can affect our environment, or it can affect the glaciers with the dust, because there's going to be massive open pit.
You can't tell us so that in
Exactly.
our country.
Exactly, but...
So what's your view on that contract?
But if you go back into Botswana, you could potentially navigate your way through systems.
Because Botswana, the entire structure is different.
Right,
Botswana
and this is my point I'm
is
getting
a
to.
50-50. Here, it's a 0-100.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's your view on that contract?
Which
and how it's
contract?
structured? The famous contract, the petroleum contract. Don't ask me which contract. What's your view on that contract?
It's an interesting contract. A bit, you know, I haven't got into the...
You've used that word about 10 times tonight, yeah?
It's that good thing or a bad thing.
Well, when you want to avoid confronting an issue, you say interesting, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't have like I read it and I did the main extracts, but it would be nice to sit with the guys who actually developed it. I've seen a lot of...
For what? For them to justify it?
No, to understand where, you know, they're thinking and, you know
or not thinking.
how
No,
it's
tell me
coming,
something.
yeah.
All right.
So I haven't got into the full detail.
Okay, you haven't got into it.
No, I
I'm
did.
go-
I read it, but not the full
Okay.
details.
I'm going to ask you one simple matrix
Yeah,
from that contract.
yeah.
A 2% royalty. Is that acceptable anywhere in the world?
While it might appear not the best thing in the world, we have to understand in the context how things were done, who created it, why it was done, or what's
So
the
who's
intention.
this who? Who's
I don't know. Maybe you can tell me who.
No, no, no.
Who wrote the contract?
No, no, I'm asking you from your international experience
Yeah.
whether any other country
Yeah.
has a rate of royalty as low as 2%.
I think it's
Or if the model country, the majority of countries.
yeah. I don't think so. I think it's definitely on the lower side. So that, I think we just need to see exactly where. So I don't know exactly where it is, but definitely on the lower side.
Your experiences of contracts like these,
Yeah.
are they renegotiable?
So generally, when we have a royalty contract, so a lot of times, it's generally what they agreed on the initial signing. But there's a few changes. I don't know if you remember in Ecuador, there was on mining, they changed some of the laws. In the
Norway
country.
itself, after 3 years, changed.
Right. They changed it, and they, bumped everything, the windfall taxes, the corporate taxes, and everything. And what happened, it deterred investors to going in. And what happened after a time, these things take time, 5 years, 6 years, is having a direct impact on the industry. And then I think a couple of years, not too long ago, Lundin went back to the government on Fruta del Norte and, helped the government and work with the government, and they realized that they need investors and they realized that they need investments in the country. And they renegotiated the contract and they dropped it. To date, they're building a few more mines in Ecuador.
Isn't that partly because some countries are willing to sell out their patrimony in what is considered a race to the bottom? If all the countries, look, whichever oil company you have in that, you can only go to countries that have oil
Exactly.
or petroleum resources.
Yeah.
So if all of them were to say, you know what, a minimum royalty rate has got to be 10%, who are you going to go to and argue?
No, that's a brilliant idea. I think, if they all collectively come together. And this goes back to, OPEC was formed. When OPEC was formed, they were trying to establish some of these international guidelines. And, collectively, if you go together, it's more forceful. And these are brilliant, go together. And, at one time, the whole of South America, including Guyana, I think, was planning to come together and establish the exact same things, like the royalties for copper, for gold, for, corporate taxes as a united body instead of an individual country. But, for sure, because obviously the poorer country with the less, resources is going to get a lower side of things.
Including less capacity
Exactly.
to talk man to man
Now, of course, which leads back
to these
to
oil companies.
what I'm saying to this training. This training, it's a long-term training. So the reason I'm here today is not because 1 or 5 years or 10. I'm, much longer in the community. And it goes back to this training because when these foreign company comes and they talk to the local, just globally, not necessarily Guyana, globally, they pick up right away that these engineers or geologists or, metallurgists is not at the level that they are. So they can just say things and, not necessarily in line or on track at the level they're speaking at.
Local content legislation or local content policy. Do you, as an international investor, support local content policies?
Most definitely. You always, this is the most, fundamental things. And as companies, you cannot come into some country, extracting all their resources, making money, and do not work with the local economy and the local guys and the local people. Generally, you try not to impose your culture onto the people. You try to work with the people. Because at the end of the day, if you're going against the tide, you will have issues. This was one of the issues to that Barrick had on the famous Pascalama project, where they put the $6 billion and they still couldn't get up and running.
Well, it's one thing to say you got to work, and everybody had. I mean, everybody misuses and abuses this term team and all of that, and partnership, and social contract. The question is this: should you have a mandatory local content regime? Mandatory meaning you frame it into law.
So generally in the contract, when you say, for example, you go into a country and you said, okay, I want to do this, I want to restart a project, and I'm going to hire 1,200, this is the thing. 95% are going to be local people. So on the initial signing of these contracts, these things are established within these contracts. So what it does is going to be saying, after X amount of period, we're going to phase out expats. We're going to take these expats, train locals, and bring them in. But how it's done is not necessarily the best way it's been done. Because when they leave, the local content people, if another company comes, you have to retrain them. But we need people who can do the actual work and stand to these guys and say, give me your well data or give me your drill hole data. Let me re-estimate these things. Let me check it, the detail. And this is not a very easy science. This is very complex stuff.
The government seems to be in all kind of convolutions on local content. But if it were to look at that Cambior agreement, it had very specific provisions, particularly in relation to the employment of persons. And it not only worked well, it worked so well that when Cambior decided it had to do something in Suriname, it took lots of Guyanese, which of course probably created local content problems for them there. But it shows you that the capacity is there if somehow you can get a local content to work. So the question is this: should you make it mandatory?
Of course, I think it should become mandatory. And just for the records, I worked with IM Gold that owned Cambior, and we worked in had owned Omai and Roosevelt. So that's a good thing. So of course, but a key thing.
IM Gold came in afterwards, though.
Right.
Don't take credit for the original situation.
2006.
It's one thing I know a little bit about.
Yeah. So then what happened is that I think it's an ongoing process. But for sure, I think they should make it in all agreement that the local content should be the majority to, with a phasing system. And then the local content takes it from there and, elevates and
But Andrew, local content requires that you have local.
Of course.
So if you don't have a depletion policy, if you don't have a phase exploitation arrangement, how do you can have the best and the strongest and the most restrictive local content policy, but if you don't have the people to fill the slots, there's an opening for the foreigners.
Oh, big time. It's always a challenge worldwide to get these slots filled, and these things work in cycle. So when the mining sector, remember, booms, and then if the prices drop, it drops. So then how do you fill these cycles? Because you're gonna one time for 5 years you're gonna need lots of technical people. When the cycle flips, You will not need any of them. And it happens worldwide, by the way. So there are people being laid off and people, lose their job in the 2008.
Do you sense that Guyana recognizes those difficulties? You're hearing, oh, we're going to do this and we're going to give this. And do we understand the challenges that we are likely to face as well?
That's a good one, because even we in Canada, on the other side, these things poses some challenges to us. Sometimes we have to bring in experts to help us. I personally recognize when I have a deficiency in an area, and I would go out and recruit around the world to help us in these specific area. And I believe if it happens, a developed country, more than likely it could happen here too. And and this goes back to the training, and not like 1, 2, 5, 10. We have to have a long-term planning there, because these things are very tricky. These skill sets are very complex, and it's not very engineering schooling around the world that do these things. It's very limited, and very few students do these things, even all around the world. I lectured at University of Toronto in mining. When I started my university again, I think it was 6 of us started. But it's not because only here. It's all over. It's like when I was in Colorado School of Mines, I think I graduated one of my masters with like a few students. So it's a global thing that, has to be addressed. And but it works in cycles. So it's not something that's limited to Guyana only. So for sure, they need to, to do more, but it's not only Guyana, and there's going to be challenges to fill these roles.
Now, Guyana's politics and sociology and everything have as part of their DNA, to use your scientific term, bad governance and corruption. Do you know of any single country, either in mining or petroleum, where natural resources have not exacerbated the situation of bad governance and corruption?
So just to mention, I haven't been following Guyanese politics closely, so I'm not.
No, but that's why I gave
sure.
you. No, this is why I gave you. If you will accept as a proposition, bad governance and corruption
so
are part of our DNA.
Yeah, for sure. So I wouldn't speak on behalf of what I think here, because I haven't been following, but I can tell you that there is definitely where we see that with the natural resource sector and with the oil sector, it actually created more issues. And the bottom line, who suffers, Chris? It's the poor people and the working class people, because I've seen this. I'll give you an example, and I'll go back to the Congo. So,
This is a really bad example indeed.
it has the richest cobalt deposit, richest copper deposit, richest tin deposit, and what it does, it has a lot of minerals, and it adds to governance and stuff like that, and it just creates more and more issue. The bottom line is, I don't know if you were following, last couple of months, they've just jacked all their taxes and stuff like that, because there's another elections coming, and they wanted to get more money into the stream, because the current president, his term was expired, I think in 2016 December. And what he did, increase the tax. So now what happened, a lot of money was just going to a few people, and these are some of the most amazing deposits in the world. And these people live so poor, like superbly poor, it's unbelievable. And it's so wealthy nation.
They're low down in the ladder on resource governance, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, like one of
Where do you predict? Tell me a prediction for Guyana in terms of governance. You know our politics. You come here, you talk to lots of people. You know the issues.
Oh, that's going to be a hard one for me, Christopher. I think we're going to have to talk over a beer with that one.
Yeah, well, we can continue over the beer, but why not talk now?
It's hard for me to say at this time.
But if you can predict prices for gold and prices for
I
petroleum...
wish I could. It's a hard one for me. So
But-
I don't know enough to comment on that one.
I'm not sure I agree with you. What do you see as the future for oil prices?
I think with the geopolitical situation, what's going on in the Middle East now, with sanctions with the U.S. and Iran getting back on the table, the Canadians and the Saudi
Well, we hope
Arabia.
sanity will return to the United States of America at some point soon.
Uh,
Calling a woman a dog. I mean, that guy he's the dog.
It's pretty interesting how things operate, but you know, in every part of the world, things are done slightly differently.
No, but
back to the point, it's
the
like
question is where is it
oil
going to?
price. So with the Russians and stuff like this here, it's my humble belief that if something triggers, which is, you know, it potentially going to happen sooner or later, I think it's going to go. I think oil just closed at 68 today.
Mm-hmm.
I think it has room to go to 80. But the key thing is that we have to monitor the geopolitical global scene and understand how we fit in on the global economy.
Have you got any idea?
Mhm.
And I ask this because nobody's saying anything, neither the government nor the oil companies. What's the average production cost of oil in deep water production?
So it varies from place to place, obviously,
Yeah.
depending on your
But let's
geographic
yes,
location.
let's
So on
under that.
average, from my recollection, it could be in the $20 per.
That would include capital costs.
No, that's a pure operating cost. So on an average, too, these are just high level number. I think a couple 100,000 tons barrel per day is high level.
Mm-hmm.
This was $6-8 billion to build.
No, what I'm getting at, because when we talk about sovereign wealth fund,
Mhm.
when we talk about cash payments to households, when we talk about projections, you really are betting on two things:
Yeah,
the price of oil
Yeah.
and the cost of production.
for sure.
So we know we can't deal much with one,
Right.
which is the
Oil
price.
price. Yeah.
What about it? That's why I'm trying to get from you, if you have any good feel of what the cost of production is in similar types of operations.
So it's hard. It's like 20 something, $30 dollars per barrel. So if oil, let's say $30, and oil is 80, so the margin is $50 per barrel
Mhm.
profit on pure operating costs.
Yeah, and of course, both are variable numbers.
Oh, big time.
So-
depending where you are
So
geographically.
the price of oil can come down, and the cost of production can go up.
Yes, of course. And that's what happened in Guyana gold fields. The operating cost went up and gold price went down.
Well, Omai Gold Mines was the biggest sufferer of that. Omai Gold Mines, they used to joke they came in the wrong time. We have very little environmental protection in the major oil contract we have. What are some of the real dangers? And we're not talking Armageddon, the imagination. What are some of the real dangers we face?
Some of the real danger, Chris, what I believe it's, you know, we have some good fresh water. Fresh water is becoming a scarcity around the world.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of land and a lot of waterways to protect. Now, we're geographically located in a strategic location. We're the only English-speaking country in South America. Brazil is a growing economy. Venezuela, while they might have some issues now, a lot of people don't know, has some of the biggest gold deposits in the world, richest deposit. So when we start looking at a bigger picture, if there's going to be a blowout or something is to happen, worst case, we are close by. I'm talking like next 15, 20, 40 years. I always like to think long term, very long term, and plan long term. If we affect our relationship more with Venezuela or something with Brazil, this can have serious impact not only locally. Obviously, locally, it's going to affect the local fish community. You know, all the things that rely on the water, on all the spillways and stuff like that. But bottom line, it goes back to close monitoring with the guys in whoever, Houston or wherever they're coming from, to be at their level or better, which is easy, but they require this 5, 10, 20-year long-term planning. And it's my belief in the sector, while it's going to be challenging to maybe get revenues in 2020 or stuff, is to start focusing more on getting young people going, doing petroleum engineering, environmental and petroleum side, working 10, 20 years and coming back.
But there's a limit to how many of those anybody can absorb. On a drill ship, you don't know how many of them you need.
No, I know, but right now, how much do we have?
I want to ask you this question, and you're probably going to plug mining. Which poses more of a challenge to the environment, mining or petroleum?
So once it's regulated properly, like depending on where countries you are, if we say it's being regulated properly, I think, you know, on the scheme of things, that maybe oil can be a bigger one if there's blowouts, because you can see.
Bigger danger.
Yeah. What's a general statement?
Dr. Andrew Ramcharan, thank you so much for appearing on Plain Talk. As I said, you probably would make a very good politician as well, so that's my wish for you.
Thank you very much, Chris, for having me, and good luck too.
Operators and viewers, thank you, good night, and I'll see you next week. You all right?
Oh, that's very good. I think you raised some good points, you know. That training is like...
No blast anybody listening, man. You got some jackasses running this country. No, you do.